Hi everyone, I'm Zezhong. Thank you for the introduction. And this work was collaborated with Harvey, Dingwall, and my supervisor, Benjamin Bach. And in this work, we are presenting a workshop we conducted for teaching data visualization and storytelling with data comics. Data is just a collection of numbers until you turn it into messages or a story. Showing a report or a dashboard can be overwhelming without adding a narrative to the data. Hence, those things work present great insight explaining what happened, why it is important, and how you can use it turn into something easy to understand and actionable. Like videos and live presentations, in 2D space, we can present infographic and annotated chart with supporting of linearity of narration. Data comics allow an author to combine the best of data, story, visualization in one single format. Back in the days in 2016, when Bach et al. Presented a paper of telling stories about dynamic work with graph comics, which took a first look at how graph comics can convey changes occurring in dynamic networks. Since then, data comics have applied to wider data types more than dynamic networks. Also, we're working with artists and conducted several data comic workshops. And an empirical study to evaluate data comics, which will be presented this afternoon at 2 o'clock. And like the comics in general, you will see data comics can tell a story by showing changes in these panels and combine visualization and illustration, play with layout to manipulate the storyline, and which we explored about data comics design pattern in Kite last year. And this was our first step to exploring supports for data comic creation. This format is effective and exciting. However, create data comics is a quite complex process and requires multiple skills, such as getting messages from data through analysis, applying effective data visualizations, communicate message through stories, present the stories by sketching, and manage the layout and visuals with graphic design experience. So you can imagine the challenge for one to make data comics. We defined 4 challenges by 2 preceding workshops on data comics at the University of Edinburgh. Challenge 1, the provided data was appreciated, but required significant time for participants to understand. And we found that participants had problem creating compelling story and wanted more guidance on this. Although we did a visualization sketching session at the beginning, participants new to visualization still had some troubles using effective visualizations in their stories. Designing compelling layout that reflect the story flow was not covered enough through the design patterns. So this time, a professor from Edinburgh College of Art asked us to do a workshop with his students. We found it was a great opportunity to test our methods and learn from the participants as well. The case study was a 3-week assignment in an undergraduate course for illustration at the University of Edinburgh College of Art. And the course comprised 23 students, many of whom had experience with classic comics before the workshop. And in this presentation, we'll show you the methodology of the workshops and the outcomes. The assignment asked each student to create 1 data comics using data collected or funded by themselves. The comic size was set A3, allowing comics to be displayed on both screen and in print. The course included workshop, group tutorial, and a final presentation where students were asked to reflect on the process and result with feedback from peers and tutors. I want to firstly show you some results and then go through the methodology. The results shown and surprisingly richness in this topic and the way of expanding visualizations. Like the example showing on the screen, some students blended fact and fiction to clarify the data visualization. Like the sustainable thief takes us through data on recycling cups, and the frogs takes us through mass extinction. Some students created visualizations designed themselves, like using the street on a zebra as a bar chart, or creating cocktail glass glyphs to report on ingredients in soft drinks. Many students use data comics design patterns, including question and answer, multiple facets, visualization build-up, zoom. And here are some examples. The full list of results can be found on datacomics.net. Let's look back at the methodologies and individual steps we had. We had 3 sessions during 3 weeks. In the first session, to quickly get into the concept of data comics and provided students with an idea of all the steps, we designed a fast-forward data comic workshop in which students worked in pairs, generate rough data comic storyboards. The fast-forward includes 6 phases and lasted for 3 hours. We starting with an introduction of data, message, and visualization, and gave an introduction to data comics, the concept, and existing examples. We presented the features of sequence, presenting time, and layout inspired by the traditional comics. Then moved to the process of data comics creating. Sketching and practice. This part, we asked them to do some simple sketch to warm up and introduce them to sketching data, like draw a bird in 3 seconds, draw a human country in 10 seconds. Eventually, we asked students to draw 7 random rectangles on a paper, then number each panel in a logic sequence. The first comic layout was based for drawing the story of their last Sunday in those 7 sequential rectangles. After this warm-up, we briefly introduced the notion of visual variables and the idea of visual mapping to facilitate sketching data with predefined small data samples and the story context. The step of creating data story. We handed out some scenario cards and persona cards randomly, and we displayed a list of messages of high-level facts and data literacy, which we identified in the previous workshops. Each card described a context like street, office, and a persona like friend, peer, and etc. We also presented a story structure example of beginning, middle, end, and a data story example in the form of video. Students had 30 minutes to create a story and then tell a story to their neighbor for self-reflection and feedback. Story sketching. We introduced some how panels worked in comics and the examples of design patterns. Students were asked to draw a draft of data comic on 1 to 2 A4 sheets. And finally, exhibition and the presentation. Comics were stuck on a wall, and students walked everyone through their draft while getting feedback from the instructors. For the second session, students were asked to collect or search for data according to their own interests, as we believed a more personal connection to their data helped telling stories. This reminded students of the process in the fast-forward session and aimed to have a first comic draft for each student, individual comic. We reminded students to create a persona and would define the target audience of their comic. Then we went through the same phases as in the fast-forward session, sketching 3 types of message, 3-minute storytelling in groups, draft layout, and provide students with printed cards of our design patterns, and students worked on the first rough draft of their data comics, followed by a walk around the room to look at and share their works. Group meetings were held 3 days after the second session with a group of 3 to 5 students. And after students present their draft individually, Instructors and peers offer suggestions and improvement to the story, visualization, and layout. And lastly, students put their works on the wall. They leave feedback to each other on post notes, and we work through everyone to give feedback. So what did we find from this workshop? We found that creating stories required students moving back and forth between the story, visualization, and the data. During story creation in session 2, students realized that they need more data. We believe this is an important message to teach and learn. But students could effectively organize the layout and develop clear reading sequence and apply design patterns. We found personas and the scenarios help students set their language tone and for data comic style and make informed design decisions like color usage and characters. We also conclude that the fast-forward session 1 was very useful, and the student told us the provided data was very helpful. From the interview and observations, we obtained further insight into challenges and suggestions for potential solutions. In our first workshop, we started from visualizations, data sets, or stories on specific topics like immigration, CO2 pollution, but we found there's 2 problems with this. Students struggled coming up with good stories in the sense of describing the data and report their insights. The reason may have been the nature of the data itself, but more likely the missing personal relationship on data. We believe it is crucial for storytelling to choose the data set and choosing data that matches personal interest and knowledge to connect and comprehend audience and messages. Visualization, to visualizing data effectively, most comics involved characters and the description of data context, such as the character for engaged frog trying to comprehend and come terms with the 6 global mass extinction. However, some comics show a few data visualizations only. With more time, we think we need to emphasize that visualization are complex constructs that often requires explicit explanation to guide the audience through an argument rather than just illustrating the numbers. Creating narration. Some students reported problems with creating stories. One obvious solution is to provide more guidance on how to develop and structure a story, explaining with beginning, middle, end, and providing context, describing data, introducing visualization, report on insight using visualizations, build a climax, formulate a conclusion, and an outlook. Repeating comic drafts. Some students have problems with creating multiple drafts for their storyboard and layouts. The reasons being the additional workload of drawing existing panels. A possible solution would be using movable cards or post-its to draw individual panels into them. Working with design patterns. We found it's hard for participants to understand patterns in that short amount of time, as patterns are learned through application. We had planned but couldn't do more specific exercise on patterns due to time constraints. We encourage short but precise exercise with the patterns and their own data. For example, create a build-up for your visualization, describe change in your data through annotated transitions, or split your argument into individual panels using multiple explanations. Participants' results were promising, showing that they actively engaged with 3 main aspects of data comics, which are data, visualization, and stories. Our reflections highlight future improvement and design constraints for data comics workshops, and hopefully will pave the way for more workshops and teaching method for communicating with data. We'll do more data comic workshops. If you are interested in running a data comic workshop, we are happy to offer you the materials and having further discussion. Thanks for your attention, and happy to take your questions.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I was wondering if this is a method for communicating data information to children. Within your process, do you ever assess the results with children? Do you see how effective they find this as a means of communication?
Sorry, can you repeat the last questions?
Yeah. Do you the comics that you create? Do children evaluate them? Do they say how effective it is as a means of communicating this?
You mean the effectiveness of the formats or the methodology?
No, the eventual format. I'm interested in how effective it is as a means of communication to children. Is there anything in your research which looks as that?
Yes, we run the studies on the format, and the study is about comparing comics and infographics, and we are presented this afternoon at 2:00. The result, to be shortly, the result shows comics are more effective than infographics in terms of accuracy, in terms of they answered some questions, and this shows more higher ratings in terms of engagement and enjoyment.
Any other questions? If not, I have a small question. You were talking about how you want some of the narratives to be more personal and meaningful to the users. Are you worried that sometimes they may conflict with the data you're trying to convey?
Yes, in the fast-forward session, because the data was we offer them, the relationship between the creator and data is not limited to just about their own data, but also their interest and how much they know and how deep they understand about the data. Especially for the students, they are from illustration background. They are not data person. They don't know how to do data analysis. In this case, they found quite challenging for them to come up with a story or abstract message from the data. Yeah, if they have their own interest, even if just a topic, they have more idea about what I want to say through my data and what's the most interesting point from my data.
Great, okay, let's thank Zezhong again.